So in my last video, I said I was going to play Sonic Unleashed for the first time ever. And I did, and have been, for the past 4 months, replaying those day stages over and over again. God, I feel like I could make 50 videos on this damn game. There is so much to talk about, so much to dissect. But I want to narrow in on one area in particular, Spagonia's own Rooftop Run. You see, I was playing Unleashed on my Xbox Series X, with 60 FPS, thank God. Well, another backwards compatible Sonic game is sitting up there as well, and it also has its own Rooftop Run. And boy is it different! I flipped between these two levels constantly, spotting the differences, ordering the set pieces, boosting when I should have homed. I want to break down each of these levels, beat by beat, and see how they stack up. Now, don't expect some slam dunk decision on who wore it best. Unfortunately for my online engagement, I like both of these games very much. You hold them up and I just see 2 number 1s. But we do have to break down how these games are different if we want to truly understand how they handled their run. So fine, let's do Unleashed versus Generations. Wow, I finally get to participate! It's been like 14 years. I can't wait to say something new. So, let's talk about Sonic in 3D. I'm just pulling your quills. Instead, let's oversimplify these two experiences. I feel like both are highly subjective in their interpretations, but in the broadest sense, Unleashed is interested in speed and reaction times, Generations is invested in functionality and play. Kind of a for fun, for glory situation. A great example of their disparity and kind of the whole impetus of this video came from this little moment while I was running back through Generations. I careened off this edge, gritted my teeth, and suddenly, I kept going. Immediately, I thought, Unleashed would have killed me here. Jason Griffith would have slipped on a banana peel, we'd hit replay on that banger, and I sure hope you remembered where that pit was, because here we go again. But in Generations, it is very hard to accidentally die. Bottomless pits are more shoved around you than waiting in your path. There's a lot of grace to getting out of them, and you get big-ass warning signs. They don't want you to stop. A huge aspect of Sonic gameplay is taking advantage of different routes. This goes back to even 1991. You can just hold right to get to the end, but if you explore a bit more, you can go right even faster. However, if you fail when trying to switch routes, you are put on sort of a punishment path. More obstacles, more enemies, and so much more slower. But you get out of it, and you get to try again at the next fork in the road. In Generations, your punishment route is almost unrecognizable. The game is interested in keeping the momentum going. Even platforming challenges like this can be solved in seconds before you're back on track. In Unleashed, the normal route is the punishment route, and you gotta play well to get the hell out of it. Just holding right will absolutely have you standing still within seconds, because you'll be slamming against spike traps and enemies you didn't even know were coming. It is a very difficult game to love on a first run. Unless you're young, which makes every Sonic game an S+. I would know, I played Heroes. So, Unleashed is looking for finesse, Generations is looking for function. That's as broad as I can get it, and hopefully gets me the least amount of rage. But now that we get it, let's see how they handle the same course. Rooftop Run. Also, FYI, I'm no professional in game design or some smart critic. I'm just going to be talking from the heart, which means a lot of my analysis is going to sound really flowery. So this is all subjective, vibe-based eval. Please don't scream at me. Rooftop Run takes place in the city of Spagonia, which is Sonic's sort of pseudo-Italy. It apes the architecture of the real-life city of Siena. A lot of clay tile, a lot of orange, big huge clock tower. This is your 3rd level in Unleashed. You get it after bumming around the capital and doing a bit of werehog. You'll have about an hour of gameplay under your belt before setting off on the run. Because Generations follows the chronological release dates, they put this one way back. It's your second to last, but there's no sharp difficulty curve when you finally get to it. It's as fun and free as the rest of them. Completion times vary, as with all Sonic levels. If you're not doing the hop, skip, teleport, then you can probably finish Unleashed run in 5 minutes. Generations has you done in half that, between 2 and 3. Now, we can't do a perfect side-by-side because Generations remixes a lot of the big moments into different areas. It's also 2.5 minutes shorter, so this makes a precise play-by-play kinda impossible. Instead, what we're gonna do is zoom in on the elements that do match, both directly and thematically. We're mainly going to follow Unleashed, as it's both longer and the original. When a comparison comes up, we'll investigate. And what better place to start than the start. Also, forgive me if I get all John Madden here and draw over your screen, but there's a lot I want to point out, so just grab an eraser. Okay, let's go. Okay, wait, stop. At the start of most levels, you typically get this arc shot of Sonic, where we travel around him as he gets into position. We hold for a brief moment before he shoots off into the level. Kinda like loading a pinball. For Unleashed, the movement of this shot is very effective in a level like Cool Edge, showcasing the vastness of the icy landscape. But Rooftop Run's arc is boxed into this alleyway. You only get wall and not a peek of the skyline. Generations opens things up. Its arc and hold imply depth through the use of the sight lines. You get 3 indicators here. This wire, 1, in the foreground, covers the balloons, 2, traveling upwards, with the clock tower, 3, a bit faded, but still visible in the distance. Close, far, super far. The balloons and confetti also set you up for the celebratory tone that this level is going for. In just the first second, you know where you need to go and how you're gonna feel. Alright, let's actually start. Both games have you speed through this rolling highway before grinding down some stairs, with a rainbow ring awaiting you. One thing to note with these 2 levels is they are both going for natural lighting, but Generations' shadows are much harsher, illustrated in this starting run. Works well around something like Green Hill's waterfalls, but when you're sandwiched between these tall buildings, Sonic can get a bit lost in the sauce. Unleashed leaves things largely lit. The shadows are tame in comparison and blend in pretty well with the rest of the scenery. I think the lighting in Unleashed is one of its biggest strengths, believe it or not. Global illumination looks fabulous on any continent. But Generations reins in on more esoteric places, chemical plants and crisis cities. They're going for 2 different things. You're gonna hear that a lot in this video. That's because most of the time, I don't think either game is screwing anything up. They're just going for something different. Traveling the world, traveling through zones. We're gonna zoom out now as both games diverge after this point. Unleashed sends you down a lot of runway, where Generations already has you platforming within the first 20 seconds. I do, however, want to comment on this plaza area in Generations. It's a clear homage to Spagonia University. When I replayed this after Unleashed, it was the first thing I spotted that got me excited. Generations places a lot of its broader references in the background. Speed Highway and City Escape have a ton of these. Rooftop Run does good work by including things like Pickle's Lab or Werehog architecture. The classic route even has flags for all the countries. I love it. Anyways, let's click back over to Unleashed. After catching this rail, you kinda bounce around this 2D section for a bit. I absolutely adore the blocking in these camera shots. Sonic is always segmented below this imaginary line. And what dominates the rest of the shot? Roofs! He never flies above them. They get a huge share of the screen, especially as he plunges down and we just see this massive tapestry off to the right. God, I love roofs. Completing this section dashes you into some hard rights. Suddenly, you're propelled through a gate, some enemies, and into our first curve. So, Unleashed's drift is kinda funny, and unless you know what you're doing, you should not be touching it. But thankfully, this isn't the case here. This is probably one of the easiest drifts in the entire game, but it's also one of the most cinematic. They put a lot of obstacles in front of you before this moment, and by the time the debris stops bouncing, you start to wonder, hey, where's all the roofs? Below you, pal, because you are high up. I think what makes this drift so dramatic is you barely catch it, narrowly missing the drop-off. And what's great is, they don't punish you for this one either. If you mess this up, there's still a high chance you're catching that guardrail. And that just looks sick. Generations gets this turn way later, and it's practically identical. However, this time it works so well that you practically never miss that curve, and never hit that rail. What's strange though is the gameplay of Generations makes it almost too operable, which sounds bizarre, but stay with me here. Unleashed's drifts are so wide that they can go haywire. But Generations' drift is tight and manageable, even during boost. This moment is exciting because it's a close call, and Generations' drift ends up handling so well, the call doesn't become close at all. But I'm not gonna knock a game for handling well, so big props to functionality. Moving on. Unleashed completes this drift and makes you take a hard right, straight into some tight buildings, and on to our next set piece. Hey, wanna see me rewrite my entire video? I thought the button prompts were permanent. The alleyway run. One of my favorite parts. This is your trailer shot. If Sonic isn't sliding in Missouri, he's running through these alleyways. So, notice how tight Unleashed is with its camera? I think Unleashed and Generations largely share the same speed, kinda maybe, but Unleashed gives off the illusion of going faster through a lot of motion blur, and getting the camera right up in Sonic's quills. Now, when you focus so hard on cinematics, you end up losing sight of what's around you. If you just pull back the camera, a lot more becomes clear, and it's easier to navigate. The alleyway run is a great example of this. The experience of this sequence is largely the same, but watch. If I just zoom in a bit with Generations, it feels identical to Unleashed. See, in Unleashed, you are squeezed right in there with Sonic. It ups the narrowness of these alleyways. Generations keeps things wide and much more legible. It also holds its position. Generations treats this run as 3 routes. The camera is almost static. as we watch Sonic merge into the right and left lane. But in Unleashed, the camera literally switches with Sonic. Any lane you merge into just becomes forward. Keeps things exciting, but also a bit hard to follow. Luckily, we got giant flashing button prompts to do some heavy lifting, but not in Generations. You can turn those off. Haha, delete. Gameplay-wise, both games try to teach you this section fairly quick. Unleashed eases you in with color. Our first two switches are signaled by red furniture, but after that, it's just bare white wall. Good luck. Generations uses a similar technique, but instead replaces some of your boundaries with these gated gardens. We can see our lane switch through the bars, so both work as intended. Nice little switch up. Either way, let's return to Unleashed. After you avoid becoming a big blue mural, you hit a dash pad and fly into our next set piece. Alright, I'm gonna take this in two parts. First is the city jump. This short piece comes right when we finish our alleyway run. I'm great with these names. We speed into the jump and soar over the city, seeing it all for just a brief moment before we continue running these rooftops. Generations has this moment earlier on, after its barrel run, and I think it's the best shot of the level. The horizon is gorgeous with a familiar aqueduct on the left, and our two friends from earlier still waiting on the right. A delicious taste of what's to come. The buildings are also varied, they angle towards your destination, and they're so green! To top it all off, they let you get tricky with this moment, dropping a fat SA1 on those haters before your knees go through Professor Pickle's ceiling. It's fantastic. Things are a lot more muted in Unleashed here, color and spectacle, but again, different intentions. Both of these jumps surprise you after getting through an alleyway, but Unleashed hides the jump behind foliage. You don't need to look around when you're in the air because the close camera is driving you forward. The buildings are vertically aligned here, and the reduction in bright scenery just signals that this jump isn't important. It's all a part of the plan. The camera also tilts down on your landing, almost like you're directing a missile. They don't pitch the camera at all for Generations jump. You get the full extent of the picture. It really is beautiful. Back on Unleashed then, we make our landing and we're immediately on to the second part of this set piece, the roof drop. I'm so glad they included this section in Generations because it was one of my favorite bits on Unleashed. So, you just hit the jump and you are full-on rooftop running. Clotheslines, breakable pots, distant horizon. It's perfect. And then, there's nothing. Without even realizing it, you're falling from this rooftop into a windy street below. It's a gentle little moment to take a breath and think, man, I'd really be running on some rooftops, don't I? Generations keeps this in, but stunts it a bit. It arrives later on after a 2D section. You take this loop and come out the other end falling. Meanwhile, the camera is busy reorienting itself from the second dimension to even get the full picture. A lot of this fall is bathed in shadow, so you almost feel like you're plummeting into the wrong route too. This moment works so well in Unleashed because it surprises you. You can't see it coming, the horizon keeps it from you. You're situated with some straight rooftop before realizing, oh yeah, roofs are on top of buildings, which means I am high up and I'm now going down. Regardless, I'm glad they tried it. This moment is so small in Unleashed that when I noticed it on my Generations replay, I did a double take. You still fit it in. I'm proud of you, Sega. Okay, let's finally land our feet back in Unleashed. After catching your breath, you boost down a curve and through a massive hallway. There's a couple of hallway references in Generations, but I think the direct one is this bit all the way at the end, where you sprint under a falling spike trap. It has the same windows. Great little bit, by the way. That chain snap is so loud, it always startles me. I wondered why this was even here. Spagonia isn't exactly Transylvania. There are no booby traps in Italy. You can say it's from Jungle Joyride, but you tackle that one in 2D, so the feeling isn't exactly identical. But I actually think this bit is borrowed from somewhere else in Unleashed. Not even in the main game. The Apotos DLC level, Act 4, has you sprinting down the exact same spike trap. Although this one is way faster. If that is the direct reference, then that is a deep cut in terms of set pieces. And I salute that. That's a lot of talking for one hallway, so let's keep going. Sooner or later, Sonic hits a goalpost, curves downward, and starts platforming through an aqueduct. Generations has a part similar to this after you grind down the clock tower. Both paths curve underneath. The goalpost is placed in a similar area, and you can even jump your way through a portion of it. But the interesting thing that Generations does is they swap the background and scenery to instead resemble a bonus stage from Unleashed, Rooftop Run Act 2. That's really clever. I never thought of these levels as anything more than singular remixes, but this part yet again references the broader space of Spagonia. Seaside Hill also does this by including Ocean Palace in its layout. In these instances, they are referencing entire zones instead of levels. And when you only get one level per game, those references carry a lot of weight. Completing this section in Generations throws us into the roof drop we went over earlier. So let's continue with Unleashed. After Sonic gets his feet wet in the aqueduct, he face plants through a cheese grater and chases the concrete. Blue pancake, here we come. So we know they could have done this in Generations because they do a similar bit in Chemical Plant. That falling animation is included, but I think it's smart they avoided it here. This part always feels slow in Unleashed. You can easily avoid the spikes, and even if you do fast forward to the bottom, your speed will be reset as you auto-run into the next goalpost. It slows things down and wouldn't add much, so I'm glad it was cut in Generations. You exit the tower by rail and hit a fountain. Homing attack those spinners and keep going, as now we enter our first arrow chase. These things are called arrow chasers, so that's what I'm calling it. A perfect example of Sonic Team showing instead of telling. You boost right into a tutorial without even realizing it, and Chip actually keeps his mouth shut. No question marks, just gameplay. 3 arrow chasers swoop in, but our boy on the left smashes into a wall within seconds. This tells the player that these things can die. Then you see one lone egg fighter at the end of the road, and you get your button prompt. Go ahead. Boost. Since you avoided the left wall earlier, you're probably in the center path anyways. You bump that robot and the middle chaser staggers, so now you know you can hurt them. And while you're distracted with the stagger, you run straight into another egg fighter, who finishes the job. Not only can they die, I can actively kill them, and you quickly learn why, as our remaining chaser fires his laser. And now you get the full picture. You know what to avoid and how to fight. All within 10 seconds. It's beautiful. This chase is absent from Generations, and even the mechanic of bumping and running is only featured in Rooftop Run, but we'll save that for the ending. I don't think you need 2 arrow chases in a remix. The one at the end is already so long that it gets the job done in terms of referencing that feature, except this time you got Omochow yapping in your ear the entire time. But you can actually turn her off in the options. Quality of life in a Sonic game. What am I, playing a mod? Anywho, after your little tutorial, you speed right into another fun curve, this time within city limits. No flying off here. Generations has this part too. They actually put it right after the roof drop, and it leads right into the alleyway run. I'm not kidding when I say these things got shuffled around. I will applaud Generations for keeping us on our toes in that regard. Even if a lot of the familiar set pieces are rearranged, none of them feel out of place in their new positions. When I played this level before Unleashed, none of these set pieces felt obviously misplaced. They worked just fine in the run that we got. But back to Unleashed. At the end of the curve, you incline up and turn sharp, launching off into another city jump. But this one redirects fast with a rail, and now we got a full freeway of rooftop running. Hey, look, I'm running on rooftops. Get a load of this. Get a load of this. The roofs are lower than our previous run. Some even look like ramps. Some even are. The short little inclines will give you a bit of air if you're boosting. You even get to smash through someone's windows. The closest analog I can find in Generations comes right after the city jump. You have this stretch of buildings that behave identically, but this time with 3 lanes instead of 2. They even let you smash through windows there also. My only issue is that it lasts for 5 seconds. They spread out more tiny slivers of rooftop running here and there, but I was hoping for a more meaty stretch. Oh well. Unleashed's section, that's hard to say, Unleashed's section ends by having you hop over these rigid slopes. If you can keep your boost going throughout and nail those funny tiny hops, this part feels really great. You get that similar near-miss feeling you got from the curve at the start. Any of these slopes can stop you dead in your tracks, so pulling off a clean run is very satisfying. Kinda like when you successfully avoid those pillars in arid sands. After a bounce pad and a cheeky little wall run, we enter the barrel run. Ooh. Alright, let's switch things up a bit. I think Generations did this part better. So essentially, Sonic has to sprint up a long street as barrels roll down towards him. Avoid the spiky ones and you're good to go. Except the camera is stretched way back. It's very difficult to spot those barrels on the horizon. Most of the time, you're visualizing these barrels after each incline. As you pop up, you have to quickly route yourself. It's important to boost here, as even the normal barrels will hurt you if you're running slow. You can get around them if you're lucky, but I've had instances where the spawns were so conjoined that boosting was essentially required. It's the unpredictability that gets me here. Sometimes you can just get a bad spawn during a perfect run. I'm sure it's happened to you. Generations solves all of this. How? Drop the barrels from the sky! You get a second to plan your positioning, and the double barrel combinations can still keep you on your toes. I also think using the clotheslines to mask the barrel positioning is a big brain move, and in line with the stage's aesthetics. Now, I will admit, if you're going fast enough, Unleashed won't even have time to spawn in most of the barrels, and you just gotta deal with that last incline. So I find Generations' mandatory set piece much more fun. It also arrives earlier, and teases the blimp for later, which, by the way, anyone else pick up how that's flying battery zone? So good. Alright, back to Unleashed. After you complete the run and kick Donkey Kong's ass, you kill some robots and launch up another building. Keep boosting, do some platforming, and we start to tackle the Clock Tower. Oh boy, the Clock Tower. Probably Rooftop Run's main icon. If you remember anything from this level, it's the climb up and the grind down. So first, let's talk about anticipation. If the clock tower is the big deal here, then we gotta get excited, right? As I mentioned earlier, Generations does a great job of keeping the clock tower in your sightlines. You see it at the start, on jumps, and at the lead up. It's always present, and you're only getting closer to it. Now, in Unleashed, you've already hung around Spagonia at this point, so the clock tower is no surprise. It's even in the stage select, so you know you're probably going up it. I preface with all of this because you don't see the clock tower for a while in that one. It finally pops into existence about 2 minutes in. There you are. To be fair, you are quite literally traversing the entire city to get there, so its hesitancy makes sense. And once it does show up, boy is it big. They really sell it as this grand imposing obstacle. It dwarfs Sonic in a lot of these shots. So while I think Generations does better with its lead up, Unleashed is better at scaring you with it once you get there. But how do we climb up this thing? In Unleashed, you gotta climb 3 stories. The first has you doing some slow platforming on floating concrete. But this is the punishment path, because you can actually skip the first floor and its goalpost entirely by firing upwards here, homing the spinners and light dashing up to the next level. I like this route more as it gives a better impression of the tower looming over you. In Generations, the clock tower comes out of nowhere. You're grinding a rail after some platforming and holy shit, we're running up the tower now. 3 arrow chasers swoop in and you gotta avoid their shots as you launch off the minute hand and into a fantastic trick sequence. But if we're being honest, you're probably running so fast the robots don't even have time to fire their second volley. You parry their laser ignition. I really wish they extended this section. I think it's a fun twist on Unleashed's original level, but it's way too brief to savor. It also kind of reminds me of Hang Castle's tower run from Heroes. You gotta put in more work in Unleashed, however. A second story of spinners is just begging for your homing attack. And once you reach the tippy top, you get to do this awesome loop around the clock as it blares out towards the city. By the way, be sure to do a stomp dash as you hit the ground here. The trail of blue around the loop looks oh so cool. After your government-mandated QTE section, we reconvene with Generations as we both go soaring through the air. This is another win for Generations in my book. Unleashed's camera movement here is way too sharp, which is helpful for gameplay but lame for spectacle. Once you hit the peak, you really just see a portion of the spire, and maybe a bit too much of that copy and paste cityscape. Generations gets clever here. It zooms far out so you can get the full brunt of tiny Sonic on that huge clock. And as our little blue speck soars past the point of no return, the camera refuses to go further. It simply tracks him from below, amplifying the height of it all. But after pulling off 27 tricks in 5 seconds, we eventually land on the ancient historical grind rail that every city ropes around their monuments. I think Generations does a better job with the rail too. They hide it behind the tower until it sneaks into position as we follow Sonic's cool-ass moves. In Unleashed, you kinda already see your route down as you're going up. Let's talk about our landing too. In Generations, you hit this thing going down. Unleashed lands you horizontal, and then careens you down. Although I do kinda get roller coaster vibes, which is always a plus. But it's not over yet, as our grind gives us a grand view of the city of Spagonia. Alright, so at first glance, Generations kinda wins this battle, right? It feels deeper, more vibrant with the patterned balloons, and you even get a good layout of Spagonia from above. But I do want to give some props to the other team here. This shot is unusually wide for Unleashed, and the depth of field and the lack of pizzazz makes it feel much more realistic. Sonic's spin around the tower also gives us a more expansive feeling of Spagonia, as you're catching it sprawling out at all angles here. Although I do always laugh when the camera snags the tower. Whoopsie! I think Generations was very smart for avoiding this. A lot of the sightlines already give us that expansive taste of Spagonia. No need for the tower spin. Either way, you're off the rail and on to the next scene. Back on Unleashed's end, our next section platforms us on some more rails, and punishment paths will just throw you into a fountain that blasts you back on track. Very Generations of you, Unleashed. You do, however, get the exact same rail curve. Unleashed's camera closes in and follows Sonic, but Generations zooms way out, so far that you see the entire section before it. You can see the Sonic level baked into the cityscape. It's fantastic. But then it throws you into the tower, which is jarring. Unleashed throws you into a couple more rails before actually putting you into an aqueduct. Well, the bottom of an aqueduct, with barrels. And then we boost into our final run. Alright, we're in the endgame now. Just need to bump a few robots and we're home free. A whole minute of Unleashed is dedicated to this section, so let's get into it. Unleashed paces this run out. It familiarizes you again with the robo-bump method, but this time puts you on some rails to keep you on your toes. After a couple grinds, you roll into the final stretch of the run, where you start bumping like crazy. Arguably, this is when the Generations part really starts. If we compare them here, then Generations is only off by about 5 seconds. But if we take the whole run into account, then Generations halves the time by skipping the rails. So, something I love about Unleashed is that Sonic can move pretty freely in these chase sections. You're taught to use the shoulder buttons to bump and dodge into lanes, but if you incorporate the thumbstick, you can really take full advantage of these chases, hit the robots in between, and you can send them both flying. Your thumbstick is way more stiff in Generations. It's hard to move Sonic when he's going this fast, but your shoulder snaps are much more, well, snappier. I think a large part of this is the camera. If you pull things back, it becomes much easier to act accordingly, and the switches feel all the more faster. It's also important to note that you have to aim your shots in Unleashed. In Generations, if you bump an egg fighter in any lane, it will home in on the chasers. At first I thought this was cheap, but I kinda understand why they did this now, because you ain't just fighting chasers, you're also taking on that blimp from earlier, but now it has lasers that can eat up 2 whole rows. It's a smart way to spice up the chase sequence, but just like the clock tower, this thing only has time to fire off 2 lasers maybe before you roll into the credits. It's a shame because I really enjoy the challenge here. Generations could have benefited from extending a lot of these runs. I think the remixes they do with the set pieces are incredible, but they're way too short. Be confident in your moments, Generations. You did a great job. Don't be afraid to get long. Okay, not there. Unleashed got no blimp, but it's got a lot of walls, and a lot of robots. We are not hungry for challenge here. The bumping can get so nuts by the end that it's almost hard to track who's left, but before you know it, you launch off a jump and fly into the goal ring. Important to note that there is no jump in Generations. You get a clear path to the finish line, but with the spacing of these dash pads right at the end, it kinda reminds me of Dragon Road's fun little finish, but that might just be me getting silly. Either way, both Sonics get to the end and complete their rooftop run. So, who wins? Me! Because I get to play both games! While I have my personal preferences, I don't think either game is doing anything fundamentally wrong here. They're just aiming for different experiences. I love Unleashed sense of speed more, but I think Generations is more sensible in its design. You can nail this thing on your first go and still have a ton of fun. What Generations really excels at is redesigning the stage to fit a different tone. It's kind of surprising. A lot of the other Generations levels stick to their guns, but Rooftop Run truly feels remixed with its vibe. This is not Spagonia. This is Spagonia in celebration. You feel more like you're running through a festival instead of kicking Eggman's ass. But Unleashed speed lends itself to urgency. You definitely feel like you're on a mission in that one, and yet Sonic is still having the time of his life, thanks to all the woos. In terms of the set pieces, Generations uses a lot more than I realized. I think the reason it feels so different is because they shorten these moments down to keep up with the pace of the other levels. They don't want these stages to give you any trouble. They want you to have a blast and keep going. But the most important thing we can look at here is how do these levels make you feel? In Unleashed, I feel like I got a job to do. Rooftop Run feels long, and it is long, but its length amplifies its speed. I really do feel like I'm traversing through the entirety of Spagonia in that one. Things also feel more dangerous here, with a multitude of chase sections and robots to home. The only time things let up is when you're grinding down the clock tower, a whole 3 minutes in. With all of that to say, Unleashed never betrays the personality of Sonic. A lot of this has to do with Jason's barks. Sonic is having a ton of fun, even in the face of danger, which makes him look oh so cool. In Generations, I feel like it's my goddamn birthday. Spagonia is so colorful, so lit up, and the soundtrack abandons the guitar for a full orchestra. I half imagine Sonic just spreading out his arms and high-fiving people down the streets. And with the focus on functionality, this feeling never breaks. I played Generations before Unleashed, and when I first finished this level, I thought, I probably should have played that game. 12 years later, I did, and Spagonia was not as easy as I remembered. I had to work for my fun there, practice my cool, and when I beat it, I really felt like I accomplished something. So, both games honor their design. Depending on my mood, both of these are A+ for me. Excuse me, S+. I don't really have any conclusion written up here besides that, but if you take away anything, try and notice the camera work in some of your favorite Sonic levels. I think the blocking and camera movement is one of the series' greatest strengths. We kinda take it for granted during the set pieces. How do you amplify the fear of getting run over? Show the bottom of the truck. How do you demonstrate the height of an air fleet? Point the camera straight down. They know what they're doing when they pull back on those loops. Spectacle is king in Sonic games, and I think Sonic Team puts a lot of thought into it. So next time you're running through Spagonia, look around, notice how you feel, and ask yourself why it works. And definitely let me know, even if the observations are subjective, I love hearing it. We're all seeing that apple in different ways. Rooftop Run is one of the more interesting levels to compare because it's the most analogous to the original. I haven't played Colors yet, so I don't know how Planet Wisp holds up, but considering the Hedgehog engine started with Unleashed, it's a handy stage to see how two games with a similar toolset handle Italy. I would love to analyze more Unleashed stages. Comparisons from generations might be difficult considering how different the Hedgehog games get, but there's so much I could say on just those day levels alone. I'd love to get into them, but that will probably have to wait. For now, Unleashed is off my chest, and I am a happier person. Hedgehog. But what do you think? I'd love to hear your opinions. Remember, none of this is academic. I'm just talking out my heart. And you can too. Don't be afraid to get as personal as you want. If you want to hear my thoughts on all the other Sonic games, I got a giant video hungry for your eyes. It's chopped up by games, so you can just zoom into the one you like and hear me shit on it. Just kidding. Unless you like Sonic 06, then get ready. Okay, that's enough. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching my video. Bye-bye.